like to introduce our next speaker, the Jedi himself, SFM Skywalker, otherwise known as Sipka Skustra, Orchard Specialist at iDeliverable, as well as the co-founder of Orchard Pros. He's going to take us through Orchard workflows today. So welcome, Sipka. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, in this session we're going to look into Orchard workflows, which is an exciting new feature of 1.7. What I really like about workflows is it enables you to create a program which is not hard-coded in code, but it's highly manageable. It's configurable also, and as business processes change, you get to update it without having to change code. And personally, I use it a lot for example, when when signing up as a new user for a website, you need to send out emails and other notifications to sign a user to a role, which requires parameters that I don't want to hard code in code. So workflows are ideal for that. And workflows are essentially an upgrade of the Orchard rules module. Have any of you used workflows yet? Oh, that's quite a few. Good. Okay, so what we're going to do in this session is look into two types of workflows, or actually two demos of two workflows. And there's one of them is long running, and the other one will be short running. Long running workflow is a workflow that will pause at a certain activity, which can be resumed at a later point, which could be minutes later, or days later, or years later. So we have topics here. Yeah, so a workflow, it's a series of distinct programming steps, where each step is modeled as an activity, and the activities together, hooked together, represent a workflow. Orchard has a design service where you can, well, most of you have seen it, where you can design your workflow and configure it. So let's look at the first demo. It's called content approval. Requirements for this demo are that when a page is created, the site administrator is notified by email to either approve or reject the page being created. If it's rejected, the author will get a notification by email and is given the opportunity to make changes. And as soon as the contributor makes a change, the workflow will be resumed, and it will notify the administrator that there was a change, and then he gets a chance to review again, and then accept or reject. And interesting part about this workflow is that it's long running, and it involves a loop using a timer. So this timer will remind the administrator to review the page that's been created. So let's see how that looks. So workflows, most of you have seen this new feature. I created two workflows. This one is the content approval workflow. It looks pretty complex, but we'll go over it one activity at a time. Here to the right, we see the library of activities. It's very nice about workflows is that, of course, you can create your own custom activities, and we'll look into that later. Every workflow starts with an event activity, but because there's two types, there's tasks and events. You will have to configure one of those events to be the start of the workflow, which is, in this case, the content created event. So when someone creates a page or any type of content, this will be invoked depending on the settings. So each activity can have a configuration form. In this case, we have it configured to only trigger when a page is created. So that's easy enough. The next step is a check. So here we are going to check if the user that's creating the page is in a certain role. In this case, we are checking for the user if it's an administrative role, because if it's in an administrative role, we don't want to go through the workflow because the site administrator he is the one approving content, so we will just exit early here. So if it's an administrator, it's yes here, then we do nothing. If it's not an administrator, we continue to the next activity. This one is interesting because this is like it's called the decision activity, which enables you to write C# code. And what we're doing here, this is more of a workaround because further down the workflow, we'll be sending emails, and we want to use an edit URL to point to the edited page of a content item. But because it's triggered by a timer, which is a background task, we don't have access to the HTTP context, so it's hard to generate route URLs. So we're using this decision activity to set some state to the workflow, which is nice that it's possible like this. And we're combining this with a token. So we're using a token, which is another powerful feature of Orchard, to set the edit URL of the content that's just been created. We set it into a dictionary of the workflow keyed by edit URL. And then we set an outcome called done. And that's a possible outcome defined here. So when this executes, it sets the outcome to done, and we continue to the next activity, which is a notify activity, which will notify the user that content has been created and requires approval by an administrator. We'll see this workflow running in a minute. Next step is sending an email, which has been simplified in one of the last releases. Email address can be expressed using a token, some subject here, some HTML content there. Here we're using some tokens. So this is sent to the super user of the website. And here it becomes more interesting because then we're gonna go to a branch activity. And what's interesting about this is that it's branching out to 3 event activities. One is the timer. This is the remind loop, if you will. So every minute it will trigger an email reminding the administrator to review content that's being created. Here we have another decision activity which will enable the loop to exit or break out of the loop if a certain state is set to true, which is done from another activity, which we'll see later. Another interesting activity is the user task. The user task enables you to provide available actions that the user can take. These actions will appear on the content editor. So if this workflow for a specific content item is in this current state, these 2 buttons, approve and reject, will appear. And then the site owner will be able to execute those actions. And based on the button that's been pressed, either approve or or reject will be the outcome. That will continue to this activity, which is another notification decision activity. Here we're setting that state we've seen earlier to exit out of the loop. And we're also setting the user action. The reason we're doing it like this is because we need to be able to set that variable here so that we can exit out of that loop. Okay, and then once it's approved, we publish the content item, send an email to the contributor, and we notify the administrator that the contributor has been notified. So that's one branch. Of course, this workflow is also handling the possibility that the administrator will just publish right away without pressing approve And so we're handling it here in this, using this content published event activity, which will trigger an event using, oh, how does this work? Oh, this is a custom activity, I forgot. I wrote the custom activity to be able to trigger an event, which is this task here. So using this trigger event activity, we are triggering this event so that this will flow starting from here. And then, of course, if the site administrator rejects the content, we'll notify the contributor that unfortunately your content has been rejected. We'll then wait for a content update event. So if the content owner, the contributor, updates his content item, we'll start from here. We'll do another check if that user is in the administrator role, and if it's not in the administrator role, we'll show a notification that the content has been updated, but requires approval by an administrator. And then we end up here again, and we start the flow from here. Now, what's interesting here is that this is a long-running workflow, and the workflow stops at any of these events. So when the workflow ends up there, it's persisted into the database and resumed when external stimulus is received, which is user input, such as updating the content item, or a timer that's being triggered, or a user task. Let's see this in action. So we're going to sign in as a contributor, which we need to create first. We'll create a new user. I will assign myself the contributor role. So now I can sign in as a contributor. For creating a page, hit save. And two things happen. You see this notification that's this activity here, that the content has been created and it requires approval by an administrator. That's this one. We also received an email here. And as you can see, the tokens work. This is sent to the administrator, admin@orchard.net, which I configured it to be as such. We can go straight to the content item editor from the email. And as you can see, we have now two buttons here, which appeared because of this activity here, the user task activity. This is really nice. I really like this one. We're going to wait for a minute just to see this timer kick in, which will send a reminder, a friendly reminder.
Can you dance to make us wait?
I'm sorry, what?
Can you dance while you wait?
I'm a bad dancer. I would, but if I could. Actually, we don't have to wait because the timer will kick in anyway. What we're just gonna reject for now. So we rejected the content. The contributor receives an email. Oh, and I forgot to show you well, this is just an example what you can do with custom fields and tokens. As you can see, I added a field here called revision notes, which allows the administrator to provide some revision notes. Of course, this is just a sample. In a real scenario, you would create a custom part so that the content would be deleted or be visible only to an administrator, not to a contributor. Let me quickly show that. So so our content was rejected. Let's make an update. Save it again. Now the site administrator gets another email so that he's being notified that there's been a change. So we can do another rejection. That content. And there it appears in the email. That's cool. Not sure why we didn't get the timer. Well, this worked this morning, but you'll have to take my word for it for now. Yeah, this is just a quick demo of what you could do with workflows, content approval, or another example is the user registration we have here. So when a new user signs up, we'll create an account. So we can, of course, implement this using controller. New user signs up using a post back to a controller. You create an account, assign it a role. But all that, you need to either implement some settings to determine which role is assigned to the user, or use a workflow like this, where you can configure the role, which is much cooler. What we do here, we wait for a user to sign up, to create an account. We check, this is a custom activity. If the user already exists, we'll show a notification and redirect the user to the sign up page. If the user doesn't exist, we'll create it. We'll assign it to the user a role, the contributor role. We'll show a notification and another notification just for demo purposes. Here we enter a brand. One brand will send an email to the administrator, notifying the administrator that a new user was created, and of course an email to the user with an activation link. This looks like this, and that's interesting. Here we're using a new token called shape.execute, which enables us to use Razor templates to send out an email. And in this case, we're using the new templates feature, where we can create templates using shape names, and which allows us to use Razor syntax. So in this case, let me show you the custom activities. We create a count activity. So to create a custom activity, you either derive from task or event, depending on whether you want a task or an event. I will write a name property, optionally a form property if you want if you want the activity to be configurable using a form, using Forms API. You override a category, a description, and this is the most important piece. Together with the execute, the get possible outcomes returns a list of possible outcomes, which are just localized strings. And the execute method is invoked when execution enters your activity. And here we're getting some state, and this state comes from when the workflow is triggered. So there's a workflow API, which enables you to trigger events, workflow activity events. And that looks like this. So we have a custom controller here, an account controller. On the front end, it looks like this. Account, sign up. This is a custom route. I created a custom part called profile part, or user profile part. This is rocks and rolls. So when we post back this form, it will be posted to the account controller. And here we'll trigger an event, the sign up event, which we've seen here. So this is a custom event. We use that name here, and we can pass in a dictionary of values. So we're passing in the first name, last name, etc., which we can then use here. It's passed along to the template engine. Also, the activity here generates a nonce, which it's a encrypted value that's used only once, which we include in the email. We set it using setState here, and here we can use it using the getState method. So that's really powerful to be able to invoke a workflow, use the values using tokens, or even using a razor template here. So this provides for highly customizable systems. While we're looking at email templates, I also wanted to show the template SMT wrapper. That's a shape. It comes from the email module. It looks like this. It's just a razor file. Here it is. It's more like a placeholder, but using the templates module, you can override that shape, and then you can. That's where the picture comes from because I overrode that shape here. This is really cool, I think. Okay, so we're sending emails here. Oh, by the way, the branch activity is configured like this. You just enter a list of available branches which yield the outcome. So we send emails at the same time here. Then we merge branch, send a notification, or render a notification that an notification email has been sent. Let's see how that looks. Here. So we received an email with an account activation link. Here we see the notifications. We've been added to the contributor role. And so now we've been activated and signed in. And the user received an email notification. Here. Which is true. Okay, so now, of course, the user can log in and start contributing content. Any questions so far?
Do you have a continuous running workflow or one that's called automatically, like every minute, which would monitor activity on a totally separate website and just use
Oh, yeah.
custom C# code to reach that website?
Totally. There's even there's a web request activity that you could use.
Okay.
To start the workflow, you would use a timer activity, which it would look something like this. They would create a new workflow. Called monitor, for example. There's a timer event, which you would set as the, oh, it's not, this one doesn't support to be the start of a workflow. I don't know why. I imagine it could be, there's a property that you can override, or that the author of this activity might override. It's called, I think it's called can start workflow. So if you create your own custom event activity, you would override this property, return true. I'm not sure this will work because I didn't test it. But this being the start node of your workflow, then the next step could be a web request or a custom activity that performs the task that you need. I'm not sure why this doesn't work, but it's just an activity. It's an event. It should work. I don't know why, but this is generally how you, if you create custom activities, how you make it startable or make a workflow, make it the start of a workflow. And the next step would be either your custom activity or maybe use this web request, where you can specify URLs, some headers, some, you know, yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Is there another question?
Another question. How well does this work with non-Orchard content items? Like, for the company I work for, we do like marketing campaigns, so we might send out like, say, let's say we're gonna send out like 100,000 like marketing materials, like send out 100,000 flyers. If they respond to it, like say they go to Pearl, you go to a certain website based on that link, maybe we'll update them with like another marketing message, or we'll send them a text, we'll send them another email, maybe we send them another flyer, another like postcard or something. We don't store those as content items right now just because there's so many, you know,
Sure.
recipients, things like that. I mean, can you do that, and also can you have like say thousands of concurrent workflows running at the same time?
I don't know. I didn't test that. I don't know what the impact would be on the system. You would have to test that, of course. But you can set any state you want in the workflow as long as it's serializable. So this workflow, it has context, and the context being a content item. So in these two examples, the context would either be the page being created or a user being created. But if it's non-content, you would maybe serialize a identifier of your entity that the workflow.
Maybe I can
Forms
describe
action.
what I'm doing in more detail.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Cool.
Other questions?
Those workflows are great examples. Are you planning on posting them somewhere?
Yes, these two will be posted, and I will write a little post about them to describe the various activities, and also explain how you would create your custom activities in more detail.
Okay, so you'll post them like as a recipe or something like that you can just import?
Yeah, it's a recipe. Yeah,
Okay.
workflows are exported, so they will be part of a recipe. Sure.
Great.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I did not play, a lot with, workflow, but I'm wondering if workflow use, background thread instead of, um, the actual, thread from ASP.NET Pool. So if we are using that, I don't know if it would be best, to run that as a separate service instead of using, Orchard, to run those workflows. Because, I'm always, worrying about, performance.
Sure.
But that you tell me that, you did not, measure, those
I didn't
metrics.
measure running thousands of workflows simultaneously, no. But,
Yeah.
but workflows are either short running, which means when they're started, they execute right after you invoked or triggered a workflow. If they're long running, then there could be background tasks involved. Not necessarily the timer uses a background task, but if it just awaits external stimulus, like the user task where you press the accept or reject buttons, for example, um, the workflow wouldn't be in memory. It would be instantiated as soon as you need it. For example, there's a driver which handles the user task buttons. That would then trigger an event, and that would reactivate the workflow.
Okay.
So you could in theory have thousands. It would be very scalable.
Yeah, one last dumb question. Why, will you use, the, that module instead of, the WF, framework to build workflow?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Why using, Orchard workflow module instead of, Windows workflow?
Oh, you're asking why you would
Yeah,
use
yeah,
Orchard
just,
workflows instead of, well,
correct.
Orchard workflows, they are aimed at Orchard content items. You can use tokens. It's integrated into Orchard. And Windows workflows, it's more broad. You can use it for, yeah, but it would require a lot of more work, I imagine, to use Windows workflows with Orchard. Um, Sebastian, could you maybe say something about that decision?
Why did we build it?
Because I'm better than the whole workflow team. No, I'm kidding. I'm not better than the whole workflow team. The issue is that we needed an HTML5 editor inside Orchard, and the other issue is that Workflow Foundation is using DLLs to submit behavior, and this will require us to build activities in bytecode and publish it on the server side. This is what SharePoint is doing. So if you push a new DLL, you have to restart to have new workflows. A workflow is a DLL. That's the reasons. Editor and dynamicity. That's it.
If you're wanting to hook into specific Orchard events, you use a workflow. That doesn't mean you necessarily have to have your workflow task be running in Orchard. You could stub out to a service.
Okay,
But workflow gives you the hooks to be reactive and manage the state machine. I think that's where the solid value is for me.
Any other questions?
For long-running workflows, is there any way of seeing where they are? So you've got your workflow, and there could be 10.
Actually, let me show you that. For example, here, there's a workflows instance associated with this phase one. If we click on this one, we'll see the blocking activities here. We'll see the workflow definition. If we click on it, I believe. There's a way to go status. Ah, thank you. You see now you see visually where it's blocking.
I'm curious, have you ever had a workflow push something onto like an Azure message queue or spawn, an Azure website job or anything external like that?
No, personally I haven't. I did do the web request activity, so it's totally possible, of course. Yeah, but I haven't done it myself. No. Okay.
Anyone else?
unless there's more questions, this concludes this demo on workflows. You can reach me using my email address or my Twitter account. Thank you.
Thank you very much.